again, I'll go back to my central point here. The police deal with vexatious complaints day in and day out. Nobody knows whether there's going to be vexatious complaints as a result of this legislation or not. The point is, of course, that the Act itself has a very high threshold for criminality. Your behaviour has to be threatening or abusive and intended to stir up hatred. That's a pretty high threshold. On top of that, within the bill, in black and white, explicitly, a freedom of expression protection. So you have every right to insult, every right to offend, every right to criticise and critique. That is the cornerstone, a bedrock of our democracy, and that's protected by this bill.
Some questions about the Hate Crime Act, first of all. Has there been any communication between the police and the government about the sheer level of complaints they've received? We've heard there might have been thousands of complaints in the first day at all, and the SPF did express concerns around the resourcing around this. So have there been any of those discussions going on?
There's regular discussions between the Scottish Government and Police Scotland. It's not a huge surprise that when legislation is first introduced that there can sometimes be a flurry of vexatious complaints. We've obviously seen that, and I would say to people, don't make vexatious complaints, you should desist, because what you're doing is wasting precious police resource and time. But I'm very concerned about the fact that we have seen those complaints, but at the same time I know that police are very adept at dealing with complaints, vexatious complaints. They do it every day and they know how to treat them. And what's really important is we have an act that both safeguards people's freedom of expression, freedom of speech, that's vitally important, but also has a really strong framework, a robust framework to tackle hatred.
There's an Old Firm game on this weekend. Are you concerned that might lead to even more complaints and perhaps people wanting to test the law further?
I suspect in a lot of games, football matches, where there is unfortunately, as we see some undesirable behaviour, that police activity, there is a greater police activity because of complaints, and that's not unusual. What I would say is what we've got with the Hate Crime Act, with the new offences that created, is a very high criminal threshold. So we have behaviour has to be threatening or abusive and intended to stir up hatred. In terms of the other part of the Act that deals with statutory aggravators, that's largely unchanged. There's been some expansion of it, but that's largely unchanged. And I've got every confidence in Police Scotland's ability to police on the back of an Old Firm game, just as they have done for many years previously.
And I know you.
Well, I'm not particularly surprised. It's not surprising to me that Labour, for example, have run for the hills when it comes to the fact that this bill has been reported, has been in the news. There have been some issues raised around the vexatious complaints, but of course Labour, who supported the bill, as did many other opposition parties, in fact every single opposition party other than the Conservatives, have run for the hills and don't want to defend, it's not about the piece of legislation, but defend the fact that we have a robust framework in place that protects people from hatred. Too many marginalised groups, too many individuals in our society face hatred. This Hate Crime Act will help to deal with some of that hatred that is too pervasive in our society.
I know one change in SR I wanted to make was a specific law around misogyny. Is the government working on that just now, and when could we expect that law?
Well, again, remember the reasons for not inclusion of sex within the Hate Crime Act was a direct result of engagement with organisations that represent women. Scottish Women's Aid, it was Engender, it was Zero Tolerance Scotland. It was those organisations that wanted a standalone piece of legislation outside of the hate crime framework to tackle misogyny, and that's what we're doing, that's what we will be introducing, and doing that at pace.